The bustling streets of downtown Atlanta hummed with the life of a typical Tuesday afternoon. Street vendors called out to passersby, car horns blared, and the faint scent of roasted peanuts wafted through the air. Among the crowd, 14-year-old Jamal was making his way home from school. His sneakers scuffed the pavement, his tattered backpack slung over one shoulder. He was in no rush. He never was. Jamal was used to being invisible in the crowd. He was just another kid from the neighborhood, always blending into the background. But today, fate had other plans for him. As Jamal rounded the corner near 12th Street, he noticed a sleek black SUV pulled over on the side of the road. The tinted windows gleamed in the sunlight, and a well-dressed woman stood beside the vehicle, looking around nervously. Even from a distance, Jamal could tell something was wrong. The woman was young, maybe in her late 20s, with long dark hair tied neatly into a ponytail. Her designer dress clung awkwardly to her rounded belly. It was clear she was heavily pregnant. She clutched her phone in one hand, glancing at it repeatedly, but she wasn't making any calls. Her other hand was pressed against her stomach, and her face was etched with discomfort. Jamal slowed his pace, unsure if he should get involved, but as he got closer, he heard her muttering to herself. "Oh no, this can't be happening now." Her voice cracked, teetering on the edge of panic. He hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath and approached her. "Excuse me, ma'am, are you okay?" he asked, his voice steady but soft. The woman looked up, startled, her wide brown eyes meeting his. For a split second, she seemed unsure whether to trust him, but desperation won over. I think I'm going into labor," she stammered. "My husband's out of town, and my driver just ran to get help. I don't know what to do." Jamal's heart skipped a beat. Labor? He was just a kid. What did he know about helping someone in labor? But as he looked at her, sweating and trembling, he knew he couldn't just walk away. "Okay," he said quickly, trying to sound confident. "Let's get you to sit down. You can't just stand out here like this." The woman nodded, letting him guide her to a bench nearby. Her breathing was uneven, and she winced every few seconds. Jamal glanced around, hoping to spot someone who could help, maybe a police officer or a nurse. But the sidewalk was emptying, the rush hour crowd thinning as people hurried off to their destinations. "What's your name?" Jamal asked, trying to keep her calm. "Isabella," she replied, her voice strained. "Isabella Carter." Jamal's eyes widened. He recognized the name immediately. The Carters were one of the wealthiest families in the city. Her husband owned half the skyscrapers in downtown Atlanta. What on earth was she doing here, alone and in distress? "You're going to be okay, Mrs. Carter," Jamal assured her, though he wasn't sure if he believed it himself. He pulled out his own outdated phone and dialed 911, his fingers shaking. The operator answered quickly, and Jamal explained the situation as calmly as he could. "There's a pregnant woman in labor. She needs help right away. We're on 12th Street, near the park. An ambulance is on the way," the operator said. "Stay with her, and try to keep her as comfortable as possible." Jamal hung up and turned back to Isabella, who was gripping the bench tightly, her knuckles white. "The ambulance is coming," he said. "Just hang in there, okay?" But Isabella shook her head, her breathing growing more ragged. I don't think I can wait that long," she gasped. "The baby's coming. I can feel it." Panic surged through Jamal. This was way beyond anything he'd ever dealt with, but somehow, he forced himself to stay calm. "Okay," he said, kneeling in front of her. "I'll stay with you. I'm not going anywhere." Isabella's eyes filled with tears, her fear mingling with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. Just then, a commotion erupted behind them. A man in a crisp suit came running toward the bench, his face pale with worry. "Isabella," he called out, his voice trembling. Jamal turned to see him and realized it was the driver she'd mentioned. But before he could say anything, Isabella let out a cry of pain and the man froze, clearly unsure what to do. "Help me hold her steady," Jamal instructed, his voice sharper now. The man obeyed, moving to support Isabella as her contractions grew stronger. Moments stretched into what felt like hours. The distant sound of sirens echoed in the background, but they weren't close enough. And then it happened. A cry, sharp and piercing, cutting through the chaos like a beacon of hope. The baby was here. But as Jamal looked at the tiny, fragile life he had helped bring into the world, a chill ran down his spine. Something wasn't right. What followed next would change all their lives forever. The baby's cry pierced the air, a fragile but powerful sound that seemed to momentarily freeze time. Jamal, wide-eyed and trembling, held the tiny bundle in his hands. The reality of what had just happened hit him like a wave. He had helped deliver a baby, a living, breathing baby. He felt a mixture of awe and fear, his heart pounding in his chest as Isabella slumped back on the bench, exhausted and pale. The driver, still frozen in place, snapped out of his daze and quickly shrugged off his jacket. "Here, wrap the baby in this," he stammered, handing it to Jamal. His hand shook as he glanced between Isabella and the newborn. The ambulance. It has to be close. Jamal carefully swaddled the baby, who had quieted down, its tiny fingers curling around a corner of the makeshift blanket. He felt a strange sense of responsibility wash over him, a feeling that this moment was far bigger than anything he'd ever experienced. Isabella, her face slick with sweat, opened her eyes weakly and looked at him. You saved my baby," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Tears streamed down her face as she reached out to touch the baby's cheek. "Thank you." Jamal nodded, swallowing hard. He didn't know what to say. He was just a kid. He wasn't supposed to be here, doing this. But before he could dwell on his thoughts, a faint sound broke through the tension. Sirens. Relief flooded the air as the ambulance finally arrived, screeching to a halt nearby. Paramedics rushed out, assessing the situation with quick, practiced movements. One of them, a woman with kind eyes and a calm demeanor, knelt beside Isabella. "Ma'am, we're here to help," she said softly. "Let's get you and your baby to the hospital." Jamal stood back, watching as they gently placed Isabella on a stretcher and secured the baby in her arms. His heart still raced, but for the first time, he allowed himself to exhale. He had done what he could. One of the paramedics turned to him. "You're the one who helped her?" she asked, her tone laced with both curiosity and admiration. Jamal nodded hesitantly. "Yeah, I guess." She smiled warmly. "You did good, kid. You probably saved both their lives." The words hung in the air, and Jamal felt a strange warmth in his chest. But as the ambulance doors closed and it sped away, taking Isabella and her newborn with it, a lingering unease crept over him. Something about the entire situation felt off. The driver, who had stayed behind, approached Jamal. He looked shaken, his usually composed demeanor cracked. "Listen," he said, his voice low and hurried. "You didn't just help anyone today. Mrs. Carter, she's not just rich. Her family's got a lot of enemies. You need to be careful." Jamal frowned, his brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" "I just helped her because she needed it." The man glanced around, as if checking for eavesdroppers. "Exactly. And that makes you a loose end. Be smart, kid. Keep your head down." Without another word, he slipped into the SUV and drove off, leaving Jamal standing alone on the sidewalk. The warning played over and over in Jamal's mind as he walked home. Loose end? Enemies? None of it made sense. He had done a good thing. Wasn't that enough? But the driver's words carried a weight that Jamal couldn't ignore. Something told him this wasn't over. At home, Jamal's mom was in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared dinner. The familiar scent of baked chicken and collard greens filled the small apartment, grounding him for a moment. "You're late," she said without looking up. "School run long." Jamal hesitated, debating whether to tell her everything. He didn't want to worry her, but the weight of the day pressed heavily on his shoulders. I helped someone," he said finally, his voice quiet. His mom turned to look at him, her hands resting on her hips. "Help someone? What happened?" "A woman," he explained, carefully choosing his words. "She was having a baby right there on the street. I called 911 and stayed with her until the ambulance came." His mom's eyes widened in shock, then softened with pride. "Jamal, that's incredible. You did the right thing." He nodded, but the unease lingered. He didn't mention the part about Isabella being a millionaire or the driver's cryptic warning. Instead, he let his mom's praise wash over him, clinging to it like a lifeline. That night, Jamal lay in bed, staring at the cracks in the ceiling. Sleep eluded him as the events of the day replayed in his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had stepped into something far bigger than himself. Who were these enemies the driver had mentioned? And why would they care about a kid like him? The next morning, Jamal woke to a strange sight. Parked outside his building was a sleek black car, not the same SUV from before, but just as expensive looking. He froze, his heart pounding as he peeked through the curtains. Two men in suits stood beside the car, their expressions unreadable. A knock on the door made him jump. His mom, still in her robe, opened it cautiously. Yes. One of the men stepped forward, his tone polite but firm. "We're looking for Jamal. Is he home?" His mom's protective instincts kicked in immediately. "Who's asking?" The man offered a small smile. "We work for the Carter family. Mrs. Carter wanted to thank him personally." Jamal's mom turned to him, her expression a mix of surprise and suspicion. "Jamal, what's this about?" He stepped forward, his stomach twisting into knots. "It's okay, Mom. I'll talk to them." The men led Jamal to the car, where he found Isabella sitting in the back seat, holding her baby. She looked tired but radiant, her eyes lighting up when she saw him. "Jamal," she said warmly, "I wanted to see you again. You saved us." He nodded, unsure of what to say. The baby gurgled softly in her arms, oblivious to the tension in the air. "I owe you more than I can ever repay," Isabella continued. "But there's something you need to know. What happened yesterday wasn't an accident. Someone tried to stop me from getting to the hospital." Jamal's heart sank. He had been right. This wasn't over. And now, he was in the middle of it. Jamal's breath caught as Isabella's words sank in. He looked at her, searching for some hint that she was exaggerating. But her eyes were serious, shadowed with fear. She cradled the baby closer, her voice low and trembling. "I didn't want to scare you yesterday, but it wasn't just labor. Someone tampered with the car's brakes before I left the house. If I hadn't realized in time." Her words trailed off, leaving a chilling silence. Jamal's mind raced. He remembered the driver's warning, the strange urgency in his tone. It all made sense now, but it also made everything feel much, much worse. "Why would someone do that to you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Isabella glanced at the men in suits, who were standing a few feet away, watching the street with hawk-like precision. Then she looked back at Jamal. "My husband has rivals," she admitted, "in business, but sometimes it gets personal. I don't know who's behind this yet, but they wanted to make sure I didn't make it to the hospital. They didn't want my baby to survive." Jamal felt a chill run down his spine. He stared at the baby, now squirming gently in her arms, and a strange protective instinct welled up inside him. This wasn't just some rich family drama. This was life or death. And somehow, he had been pulled into the middle of it. "I just wanted to help," Jamal said quietly. "I didn't think it would turn into all this." "I know," Isabella said, her voice softening, "and I'm so sorry for dragging you into it. But whoever did this knows you were there. They might see you as a threat, Jamal. That's why I wanted to find you, to make sure you're safe." Jamal didn't know what to say. Safe? How could he be safe when people willing to harm a pregnant woman and her unborn child might be after him now too? He thought about his mom, about their little apartment, and the simple life they led. They didn't have anything to do with this world of wealth and power, but somehow it had found them. One of the men in suits approached, interrupting Jamal's thoughts. "Ma'am, we need to move. We can't stay in one place too long." Isabella nodded, then turned back to Jamal. "I'll have someone keep an eye on you for now, just to make sure nothing happens. Please, if anything seems out of place, call this number." She handed him a small card with a name and phone number printed in neat black letters. "And Jamal, thank you again. You're braver than most adults I know." Jamal nodded, still overwhelmed, as the men ushered her back into the car. He watched the sleek vehicle pull away, its tinted windows reflecting the afternoon sun, and then stood there in the middle of the street, clutching the card tightly in his hand. For a moment, everything felt surreal, like a scene from a movie. But this wasn't fiction, it was his life now. That evening, Jamal found it impossible to focus. His mom noticed his distraction during dinner, her brow furrowing with concern. "You've been quiet since those people came by. Everything okay?" Jamal hesitated, debating how much to tell her. He didn't want to worry her, but he also didn't want to keep secrets. "It's just, the woman I helped, Mrs. Carter, said someone was trying to hurt her. I think it's serious." His mom put down her fork, her eyes narrowing. "Hurt her? Why would anyone do that?" "It's something to do with her husband's business," Jamal said. "She thinks I might be in danger too." His mom's face tightened with worry. She reached across the table and took his hand. "Jamal, listen to me. If anything seems strange, anything at all, you tell me right away. We'll figure this out together." Jamal nodded, grateful for her support, but he could see the fear in her eyes. He hated the thought of bringing this danger into their home. That night, he double-checked the locks on the doors and windows before going to bed, his heart heavy with unease. The next few days passed uneventfully, but the tension lingered. Jamal couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. On his way to school, he noticed a car parked a little too long on the corner. At the store, a man in a baseball cap seemed to follow him down every aisle. It might have been paranoia, but it felt real enough to make his skin crawl. Then, one afternoon, as he was walking home, a black SUV pulled up beside him. His pulse quickened, and he tensed, ready to run. But the window rolled down, and he saw a familiar face. It was the driver from that day. "Get in," the man said urgently. "We need to talk." Jamal hesitated. He didn't trust this man, but curiosity got the better of him. He climbed into the SUV, his heart pounding. The driver didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Things are heating up," he said grimly. "Mrs. Carter didn't tell you everything. This isn't just about business rivals. There are people out there who think her husband owes them, big time, and they're willing to do whatever it takes to collect." "What does that have to do with me?" Jamal asked, his voice rising with frustration. "I'm just a kid." "You're a witness," the driver said bluntly, "and that makes you a problem. But I think there's more to it. Whoever's behind this, they're watching you for a reason. Maybe they think you know something. Maybe they're waiting for you to slip up." Jamal's head spun. He felt like a pawn in some giant game he didn't understand. "So what am I supposed to do?" The driver glanced at him, his expression unreadable. "Stay alert and stay alive. You've got more people on your side than you think, but you need to be smart. Don't trust anyone unless you're sure." As the SUV dropped him off near his apartment, Jamal couldn't shake the feeling that his life was spiraling out of control. He was just a kid from the neighborhood who wanted to help someone in need. How had things gotten so complicated? And more importantly, how was he going to get out of this mess? Jamal couldn't shake the feeling that something bad was coming. Every step he took, every glance over his shoulder, felt heavier than the last. The air seemed thick with unease, and even the familiar streets of his neighborhood felt different, shadowed by something he couldn't quite name. It wasn't just the car he'd seen lingering on corners or the people whose gazes seemed to linger a moment too long. It was a gut feeling, a sense that his life wasn't his own anymore, that he was being dragged towards something he couldn't stop. At school, it was impossible to focus. His teachers' voices blurred into background noise, the chalk squeaking on the board and the hum of conversation around him only adding to his restlessness. His friends noticed his distraction. "You okay, man?" one of them asked during lunch, nudging him with an elbow. Jamal forced a smile. "Yeah, just tired." But the truth was, he wasn't okay. The weight of everything, the warnings, the strangers, the knowledge that someone wanted to harm Isabella and her baby, pressed down on him like a storm cloud. He didn't even feel safe at home anymore. Every creak of the floorboards, every knock on the door, sent his heart racing. That evening, Jamal's mom sat him down after dinner. She looked serious, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Jamal, I've been thinking about what you told me. I don't like it. I don't like that these people are involved in your life. Maybe we should go to the police." Her words made sense, but something about them filled Jamal with dread. The police seemed like a logical solution, but would they really be able to help? This wasn't just some petty neighborhood squabble. These were powerful people, and Jamal wasn't sure how far their reach extended. "I don't know, Mom," he said hesitantly. "What if it makes things worse?" She frowned, clearly torn. "You're just a kid, Jamal. You shouldn't have to deal with this. It's not fair." "I'll be okay," he said, trying to sound confident, but even as he spoke, he wasn't sure he believed it. That night, Jamal lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. The card Isabella had given him sat on his bedside table, the name and number printed neatly in bold black letters. He thought about calling, about asking for help, but something held him back. Maybe it was pride, or maybe it was fear of dragging himself deeper into something he didn't fully understand. His thoughts were interrupted by a faint noise outside. At first, he thought it was his imagination, a branch scraping against the window or the distant sound of a car passing by. But then he heard it again, louder this time. Footsteps. Jamal's pulse quickened. He slipped out of bed, careful not to make a sound, and crept toward the window. Peeking through the curtain, he saw a figure standing on the sidewalk below. The person was tall and dressed in dark clothing, their face obscured by a hood. They weren't moving, just standing there, staring up at the building. Jamal's breath hitched. He stepped back from the window, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst out of his chest. Who was this person? Were they here for him? He grabbed his phone, his fingers trembling as he scrolled to the number on the card. He hesitated for a moment, then dialed. The line rang once, twice, before a voice answered. "Jamal." It was Isabella. She sounded surprised but concerned. "What's wrong?" "There's someone outside," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I think they're watching me." Isabella's tone immediately sharpened. "Stay inside. Don't go near the windows. I'm sending someone over right now." Jamal hung up, his heart still racing. He backed away from the window and sat on the edge of his bed, clutching his phone like a lifeline. Minutes felt like hours as he waited, every sound amplified in the stillness of the night. He thought about waking his mom but decided against it. She didn't need to be any more worried than she already was. Finally, headlights illuminated the street outside. A sleek black car pulled up, and two men stepped out. They approached the figure on the sidewalk, and for a moment, Jamal thought there might be a confrontation. But the figure simply turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows. One of the men glanced up at Jamal's window, nodding slightly before getting back into the car. Jamal let out a shaky breath. Whoever they were, they had scared the person off for now. But the encounter left him rattled. The next morning, Jamal received a call from Isabella. "I'm sorry this is happening to you," she said, her voice filled with guilt. "I should have warned you earlier. Whoever is behind this, they're relentless. But I promise, we're doing everything we can to keep you safe." "What do they want?" Jamal asked. "Why are they after me?" "They think you know something," Isabella said. "Something about that day, but the truth is, I don't even know who they are yet. My husband has been trying to track them down, but it's complicated." Jamal felt a surge of frustration. He hadn't asked for any of this. All he had done was try to help someone in need, and now his life was in danger. "I just want this to be over," he said quietly. "I know," Isabella replied, "and it will be. But until then, you need to be careful. Promise me you'll stay vigilant." Jamal promised, but the truth was, he wasn't sure how much longer he could keep living like this. The fear, the uncertainty, it was all too much. He felt like a pawn in a game he didn't understand, and he didn't know how to escape. As he hung up the phone, he couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come.